Alright guys, I wanted to show you some of the things that I'm doing with Dungeon Saga. Uh, so for all those who know and play this game, it's a dungeon crawler in the vein of Hero Quest, uh, Warhammer Quest, Advanced Hero Quest, and other dungeon crawlers that have come out recently. This game took a lot of flack for being a set of advanced rules that were not very well written, and so I've got the Dungeon Saga Adventures Companion here, and I mean it's a decent book. It's got a lot of great ideas in it, but unfortunately, it had a lot of problems as well. A lot of the rules were unfinished. A lot of them are confusing. There's just a lot of general problems with the rule set. Now, with a little bit of intelligence, a little bit of work, I think you can make it to be something really great. So I want to show you guys what I'm doing with this game because, to be perfectly honest, I think I've got it to a point where it's pretty fun, and I've been able to overcome a lot of the shortcomings of it by just tweaking some of the rules. And I could go out and post something on Board Game Geek or some other site to detail for you guys what I'm doing, and I may end up doing that. But there's so many little rules here that I've put in to make this game work better. I wanted to show you live, in a video of how I'm doing it. So just to kind of show you guys my setup here, first of all, I own most of the Kickstarter stuff. I bought it later on eBay, and I've got the extra sets of cards, the Uncharted Dungeon cards, the location decks, all the basic paraphernalia items, events, the Invisible Overlord deck, and the magic item deck, the trap deck. There's a few other decks, but these are the ones I'm using for the most part. Now, for this particular adventure, just to show you guys how this works, I'm just running 2 characters, and as you can see, I'm not using the models from the game because the adventure companion actually allows you to build your own characters. So on the right here, I've got a fighter of the warrior subclass, and here I've got a wizard. And both of my characters are level 2. This will be my 3rd adventure that I've been playing, and they're on level 2. And just wanted to show you guys what I've done here. So to start off with, when I'm running these, backing up a little bit, I've been looking for a random generated dungeon crawler for a long time that works really well, and I'm sorry to say, but there isn't one on the market that exists currently, at least is being sold, that does this well. There's the old, as I said before, the Warhammer Quest are pretty good. Advanced Hero Quest is pretty good. There's obviously some rule issues there as well, but there's a lot of things about those games that are so outdated. I get bored of the way the tiles are set up. They're all square rooms. They're all long, boring hallways. I think the way that Dungeon Saga does their rooms and the Uncharted Dungeon deck is pretty brilliant. And there's a lot of things this system just gets absolutely right. And I'm going to show you guys some of that here in a minute. But first of all, the way I'm doing this is I set up an adventure. The first thing I do is I pull out just a 4x4 tile, and this is just from a regular Dungeons and Dragons tile set. You can buy this anywhere. I'm sure you guys have something lying around you can use, but I'm using this as a starting point for the dungeon entrance, essentially. Then what I do is I pull out my die and Usually I'm using a D6, but it can be whatever you really want to use. We're just using percentile dice here. So I set up the staircase on one of the sides of the walls, as you see here, and my rule is that the characters need to start at least touching the staircase with any part of their base. Then what I do is for the other 3 sides of the room, there's 3 other sides here, I roll the dice on a d6 to determine, first of all, what how many doors there are in this room. There can be up to 3 doors on a D3 roll. And in this case, I rolled 2 doors. And then I did a second roll to determine which side of the room that they're going to be found on. So in this case, I have 2 doors, one leading this way and one leading the other way. Now, the second thing I do is when I'm setting these up, I decide how deep I want to go in this dungeon. So as you can see here, we have quite a few cards. This is a really thick deck full of random rooms, and I decide how far I want to go in this play session. In this case, I'm going to go 4 dungeon levels deep, or 4 rooms deep. So I've already picked out the 4 rooms, and here's 2 of them here. But as soon as I lay a door out, I place the Uncharted Dungeon card next to the doorway as soon as the door comes out. Now what this tells me is that in this direction and this direction is one of our objective rooms. Now what this does is it means that you may need to backtrack in the dungeon. And just to understand my philosophy here is that a dungeon crawler in my book has to have the bread and butter of rooms and corridors, and it has to have the ability to backtrack in your dungeon and have logical consistency in your dungeon. Makes sense. The vast majority of dungeon crawlers out there in the market, and most historically, don't do this. They have the illusion of random movement, but in the end, none of this actually matters, because none of this actually is generating any sense of space. And as much as I love Shadows of Brimstone, which is a modern kind of iteration of Warhammer Quest, that game has the same problem. I mean, I love that game, but most of the time when you're walking through dungeons, the layout has absolutely no effect on what you're doing. All it does is make a pretty looking set of rooms on your table. That's it. It doesn't do anything else. And I go back to the old Hero Quest game. That game, like few others ever made, had true exploration where you were moving between rooms and corridors, and you had backtracking. You had to go back to doors that you had missed prior to that. And this opens up the door to so many things, for side quests, for choices. It just creates so many more choices for you. So this is how I play this. I play placing the actual tiles next to the doorways, and now we know that one of our objectives is this way. This may or may not be where we need to go to complete this quest. I set the rest of the cards off to the side that I'm not using, the less, in this case 2 more off to the side, for when we uncover new doorways. So as we continue on, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we travel through each of the doorways and generate the rooms and how that is accomplished. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention is how I create objectives for these dungeons. That's something you want to do first. So these event cards have objectives on them, randomly generated. Some of them are defeating a boss, finding treasure, exploring rooms, etc. Now those are fine, but I think they're a little bland. So I've come up with some of my own objectives to make it a little more interesting for each of these dungeon crawls. So in this particular case, what I've decided to do is that my objective here is I'm going after a magical necromancer who's been harassing the local village and sending up undead to the surface. And for that necromancer model, I'm just using the main villain from the base set for that Necromancer model. And this can be whatever you want it to be. You know, your objective can be whatever you want. Come up with something interesting, put some story into it. It could be as light as or heavy as you want. Now, on top of that objective, I'm also adding in a side objective, which is rescuing the bartender. So the bartender has been kidnapped by the Necromancer, and he's somewhere in the dungeon with his faithful dog, and we're going to go after him as well. And he is an optional quest. We don't have to rescue him, but if we do, we're going to get more loot and more treasure for it. And I'm going to explain exactly how that's done later on as well. So I'm going to show you guys how I start building this dungeon out here. So I'm going to go ahead and take my first turn. So I'm going to take my main character. He's my warrior. I'm going to move him one space, and you can move diagonals in this game next to the door. Now the rules state that if you come up next to a door, you draw an event card to determine whether or not that door has a lock on it and if it's trapped. So we're going to draw an event card, and as you can see here, we have a lock. It's a level 2, and we have a difficulty of breaking the lock of 3 combat dice and 3 defense. And it also has a lock trap. So we ignore the rest of the card. We're just paying attention to what's up here on the top. That's all we're paying attention for this card. Once we're done with that, we're going to discard the card. So if we want to, we can pull out one of these tokens for the lock. And in this case, I don't have any thieves or anybody who can pick locks. So this lock number doesn't actually matter for us because we can't pick locks anyway. All we can do is bash them. So if we were picking the lock, we'd have to worry about the trap. We don't have to worry about the trap because we're not picking the lock. We're just going to bash it down because that's the only way we can get through this doorway. So after my move action, I'm going to go ahead and take my combat action to try to break the door down. And in order to break it down, I've got to get I got to get higher than a 3. I have to get at least 1 hit against it. So my fighter is combat dice 4, and we're going against combat dice 3. So the purple dice is mine, and the red dice is the door's dice. So we take the dice together and we match it up. You guys know the rules for Dungeon Saga. There's no difference here. 6 beats a 5, 3 blocks a 2, and 1s don't count. Well, 2 wouldn't count anyway because it has a defense of 3. But we did get our 1 hit, so that means we've destroyed the door. It only takes 1 hit. So we go ahead and take the door off the table, and that's been removed. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to decide what is here. Are we approaching a corridor, or are we approaching this room that we're looking for? So we're going to go ahead and roll the dice and find that out. Now I have some of my house rules here that I'm using that I've already kind of written up. And so on our rule for opening a doorway, we roll a d6 and we determine whether or not there's a doorway. On a 1 to 3, there is a hallway. On a 4 to 6, there's a doorway, or a actual room that we're looking for. So we're going to go ahead and roll, and it looks like we're going to a hallway. So now that we've rolled for a hallway, we need to pull out a hallway tile. And again, these are more Dungeons and Dragons cards. Now I've made the now one of the things I want to do as well is I'm going to leave the doorway on the map so I know where the entrance to this hallway is. Now here is considered to be blocked. In fact, I'll move the doorway between the two just to kind of indicate that there is no other way to travel through that stone there. So now I've decided that I can move this any way I want. If I want to put it here, I can do that. If I want to put it here, I can do that. If I want to put it long ways, I can do that. It doesn't matter. You know, if you've got the room on your table to set it up in a certain way, then do it that way. Now, once I've determined that it's a hallway, I'm going to decide if there are any doorways here. So go back to my house rules here. I'm going to roll a d6, and on this time on a 1 to 3 we'll determine how many doors I actually have, between 1 and 3 doors on any of the 3 sides that we have not already come from. So this side, and this side. So we're going to use a d6 roll again. Now on a 4 to 6 is a fail, and there is no door in this hallway. So this is a dead end. There is no doorway in this hallway. So that's considered a dead end passage. So that's the end of my turn. And just letting you know here, there is no way to come to a complete and total dead end in the game. If it so happens that our other passageway comes to a dead end, we will have to force a room in that direction, or another doorway. So we cannot come to a complete dead end and call it a finished adventure. So we will continue to roll until we get what we want, or we'll basically force the situation and put a doorway in if we don't roll that way. So our old Uncharted Dungeon card, I'm just going to go ahead and put it back in my original stack because that's going nowhere. So now what we're going to do on the next step here is we're going to pull out an Invisible Overlord card to see if anything happens in the dungeon. So we look at the bottom. Is it an interrupt? No. So this wouldn't count for anything anyway. There are no monsters on the board, so that doesn't matter anyway. Now step 2 is to move my wizard, and she's going to move here, and she's going to explore as well. See what we have. Now in this case, this is a locked door with a magical device on it that we have to get through to break it with magic. So, and I swear I did not stack this deck. This is all completely random. You're as surprised as I am. So we got fortunate enough to where the wizard is able to open this door only. So we timed that just right. So that's a level 1 ward on the door, and we're going to pull out her spell, which is the ability to break wards. So we're going to use Break Ward, which reduces a ward in an adjacent square by 1. And this is only a level 1, so as soon as you cast that spell, it'll be immediately broken. And we go ahead and turn the card sideways, indicating that we've cast a spell, and we cannot roll back until we end this round. So we go ahead and remove this, and we follow the same, well, let's go ahead and leave it on this time. We're going to go ahead and follow the same steps as we did last time. We're going to roll to see if we have a hallway or door. Again, a 1 to 3 is a hallway. Or, excuse me, yes, a hallway. So 4 to 6 turns out to be a room. This is the room we're looking for. So now we're going to go ahead and flip our card, and we're going to look at the card, and this is what we've got. So this is the entranceway with the red, and the green arrows represent any exit ways. The red dots represent traps or monsters. So we're going to go ahead and set that up here and continue on to see what we find in this room. Alright, so we've set this new room up, and based on the luck of the draw, we were able to pull out this card. Now, the rules say that it's impossible to draw the boss of a dungeon in the first zone, because normally on a 3 or a 6 you have the possibility of pulling the boss room. But this is the first room, so that wouldn't have been possible. So we look at this number here, will tell us the number of monsters and their levels in the room, so level 3. However, I've made a modification of this to increase the difficulty. So what I do is I take the highest level character in your group, which in this case he's a level 2, and I add those 2 points, or whatever level you're on, to that number at the top, which will give us a nice increasing difficulty curve based on your character's levels. So this is a level 5 room. And so now what I've also done here is I've made up my own. If you look in the back of the adventure book, they will show you all of the levels of all the creatures in the game. So up here at the top I have levels assigned to all these monsters. Now, I own a lot of other miniatures. I have most of the D&D adventure games. I have a ton of the Descent second edition models. I have boy, I don't even remember all the different sets I have. I have quite a few. But anyway, what I do is, and I've also got some of my own models I've just bought over the years. So what I did is I added these to the game. I customized them and made them into my own monsters, just to increase the variety. And I've divided them up into different categories. So I've got abyssal monsters, which includes some in the base set, the expansion, I should say, of Dungeon Saga. But I've also added some other creatures as well that I have as for miniatures. I've got orcs, more orcs I've added. I've got more undead that I've added to the game. Now I've got dungeon dwellers, and what I do for dungeon dwellers is interesting. So anytime that I come to a new room, the first thing I do is I roll a dice. On a 4 or higher, I have 1 dungeon dweller. And I take that number, that 5, and I go down the list. I roll a die randomly based on the number of creatures that I have that are worth 5 points or less. And I go down and I roll the dice on all the creatures that are a possibility for this room. And whatever I land on is what I get. In this case, I landed on a spider swarm. So they're just a dungeon dweller called a spider swarm. And I've also given them special abilities, and I'll probably share these afterward, the creatures as well as their abilities. Link to that to the video. But they have poison and paralysis against enemies that they attack. So they're fairly weak creatures unless they get a lucky hit on you, and then they can paralyze you. But you can see I've added quite a few creatures to the game. In a Lost City, a lot of these miniatures are from Shadows of Brimstone, and then the Drow from the Legend of Drizzt board game. So anyway, this is my big list of monsters that I use to add to the game, and I roll on that chart every time I open a door. And the brilliancy of this system is that high number that I have, that I start off with, my first roll that I do, you have the possibility of fighting a creature of whatever that high number is. In this case, it was 5, which is pretty low. But let's say you pulled out a card that said 15 on it, and then we're adding 2 levels to that, so that'd be a level 17. Now you come over here and you look at the possibilities of a level 17 creature, and you can just look at my list here. There's quite a few things. A troll, what's a level 10? A lich, which is 15, a Draco Lich, a Wendigo. So quite a few different kind of monsters that you could come upon. And again, they're very rare. So the game does a good job of making these difficult monsters rare. The Shadow Dragon, Stone Golem would be a possibility. My monsters go all up to level 20. So when you're on level 10 in this game, which is the max level of Dungeon Saga, you could encounter up to level 25 on the card totals in the game. So that's quite the number of monsters. You'd be getting possibility of a red dragon with a few minions next to him, for an epic battle. And I think this system is amazing. I can't think of another dungeon crawler that does the monster spawning so effectively, where you're see, the thing I hate about Descent second edition is that it pours everything into the game in the very first level. So you have the chance of fighting shadow dragons in the first game. They're obviously weak in shadow dragons, but to me that's part of the fun of any RPG is, hey, someday I'm going to be able to take on a dragon or a demon or a lich or some of these big enemies when I get strong enough. In the beginning I'm going to be taking on skeletons, but still, you still have the opportunity, if you get lucky enough on the roll, to fight a troll or fight something big, even at the beginning. So, but it would be very rare. It wouldn't come up very often, which is how it should be. And I think Dungeon Saga does it brilliantly. So, anybody can tell me if it's been done better in other games, but I think that the way the monsters respond is awesome in this game. So we also spawned a skeletal. So after I spawned the monster in the room for the just the dungeon critters, we spawn from a selected list of monsters that I choose from. So in this case, we've got a dungeon full of undead, and so I'm picking only from the undead list of monsters. So the undead will be the only type of creatures that we will run into other than the dungeon critters. So that's going to help us to maintain some sort of continuity in the dungeon, not make it look like a circus. But then again, you could put in whatever you want. If you want to do a dungeon circus, a dungeon zoo, you can put in, all the creatures that you want, and just, roll a D percentile dice, a D100, and just go down the list and pick out, liches next to orcs, next to, robots and things like that. That's up to you. But in this particular dungeon, I've themed it out to be a necromancer we're fighting, so we're fighting, dungeon critters and undead. Now we also rolled a die, and we rolled a D6. And what we do for the side quest is if we roll a D6, and if we roll what we're going to do is we're going to roll a percentile number based on the number of cards that we have left that we haven't explored yet. So in this case, we have 3 cards left that we haven't explored. 3. So in that case, we're going to roll a D6, which will be a D3 dice. And if we roll a 1, we come up on, or a 1 or a 2 in this case, we're going to come upon our side quest. And we rolled a 2, and we came upon our side quest. So our villager bartender is here locked up in the dungeon. He's being guarded by the guard dogs and a bunch of spiders. And as you can see here, we've got actually 2 doors in this room, because on the side we've got the option of 2 doors. So we rolled just lucky enough to get those 2 doors pulled up. So now we have 2 paths to go down to look for our final objective. So since our wizard is done moving, we're going to go ahead and do, so here's another rule I've done. Since we're not running with a full squad, only 2 characters instead of 4, I'm doubling up their actions, and I've kind of borrowed that idea from the Star Wars Imperial Assault game. So every character gets 2 actions, and alternating between the 2 to keep the game balanced. In the case of 1 character, you do 4 actions with the 1 character. In the case of 3 characters, you'd have to probably do, share an action between the 3 of you every single round. So between every single character action, we draw a interrupt, and yes, we do have an interrupt this time. That means the monsters get a chance to go. And in this case, up here we look at this number. That's the number of monsters that are allowed to act this turn. 3 monsters, and they're going to target the spellcaster and the unarmored. Now that's going to be our wizard, because she is both unarmored and a spellcaster, and the order is to pin. Now this is the part of the game that most people have the problem with, because a lot of the rules were not written well and they're very vague. And I've actually used some of the fan modifications on Board Game Geek that supposedly fix this issue and make it more streamlined, make it more make more sense. And to be perfectly honest, I played with that for a couple weeks, and they didn't really help very much. In fact, they made the game even more convoluted. It was constant page flipping, constant looking at what they do. And one of the things I noticed is on these fan rules is that every single action they do ends up as an attack, and almost every single action. And I just think that's wrong. I don't think that every single action should be an attack. So my philosophy is on this is use common sense. Anything that the rules don't really explain, use common sense or use it to your advantage, whichever makes sense the most. So in this case, 3 monsters are going to go, but we've only got 2. So that means they're all going to go, and they're all going to target her on a pin order. Now, a pin is essentially trying to get her surrounded so that she can't move. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that involves moving into her combat zone. The word's not combat zone. I'm drawing a blank on that, but so the rule states on a pin, move so that as many heroes as possible. Yes, the front arc of one or more of the overlord's models, when all heroes are at least one front arc, start doubling up. Okay, so in that case, I will do an attack because they are within their arc. That's what they're going for, and they wouldn't. Why wouldn't they attack in their arc? That makes common sense to me. So they're going to go for a pin action. Now, since these are custom monsters, I'm going to look up their stats real quick so I know how much they move. Okay, so Spider Swarm moves 6 spaces, and the Skeletal Hound moves 6. So normally you start with the farthest units back in the case of something like this, because they're trying to move up to the front to get into a pin action. I'm going to go ahead and, since they're equal spaces away, well, I suppose the spider may be a little bit further, but we'll go with the spider first. So 6 spaces, and you can move diagonal in this game as long as you can move in both spaces adjacent to the diagonal space. We cannot move into here, so we could not move diagonal there. So we're going to have to do a normal move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's not enough to reach her. Now, also, I forgot to mention that this room generated traps. And what we do for that is we pull these trap tokens out and we place them in the normal spaces where the monsters go. The monsters can be on top of traps. They don't affect monsters at all, but if we step on one of those, we're going to flip it over and see if there's a trap there. There may not be a trap, but there's a possibility. Now, what this does is it's basically going to restrict your movement, and during combat, you're going to want to try to avoid stepping on these. And in certain cases, you may have to. It may be more worth stepping on one of these than to be getting attacked by a monster or so forth. Now, also, you'll notice there's one right in front of this door, which could cause us problems down the road here, but we'll come to that bridge when we cross it. So this guy's going to move as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He cannot reach her. So that's the end of the monsters round, and they're interrupt. And we go to the second half of the first round with our main character. We started with him, so we're going to go ahead and alternate back to him again. And he's going to move back. He can move diagonal there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as soon as he's gotten into the arc of the enemies, he can no longer move. He's stuck in combat now. And I love this system in this game. How restrictive movement is. It just feels very tactical to me. And it really is kind of like a chess game once you get playing. I think they do a brilliant job of the way they designed the combat, the tactical movement. And by the way, he can move 6 spaces as well. So he's going to go ahead and attack. And let's see, I think we'll go for, I think the spiders are probably more dangerous. If they get a hit off, they have poison. So we're going to go for the spiders. And they have 2 combat dice and 1 armor, so they're pretty weak. So we're going to go ahead and roll 4 dice for attack. And it rolls 2 on defense. And that's a great hit there. Now, by the way, our last game, I went to the shop and I bought a short sword. Now, here's another thing that I need to explain. And we keep interrupting here, but I'm trying to explain all these house rules that I put in the game. Another weakness of Dungeon Saga is the loot. The game is very low on loot. Now, this is the stack of basically potions and such, which is a decent size, but there's only maybe 4 or 5 different types of items in here, which are your consumables. And then you've got the magic item stack. And you say, well, that's a pretty big stack of items. And you may be right, but most of these items are very, a lot of them are consumables, like magic potions, things like that. And the other items are, a lot of them are restricted to classes. So, only an elf can equip with something, a dwarf another, so forth. I think the game just has a lack of loot, and that's one of its other weaknesses. And one of the things that bothers me as well is that there is no, mundane stuff. Everything is magic, and that bothers me because, any kind of dungeon crawler RPG has got to have mundane items. You got to be able to equip with a sword or chainmail, and I mean, Hero Quest pulled that off great. So what I did is I had some mundane items into the game, and I'll kind of show you some of those here in my house rule document. So scroll down here to my mundane equipment. So you can buy these items for X amount of gold, and I'm still tweaking the gold prices. I think they're pretty decent. You can't buy them after the first adventure, but give 2 or 3 adventures and you're going to be able to afford some of the stuff, which I think is about comparable to Hero Quest, which I thought was always great. So in my last adventure, I was able to buy a short sword for my main warrior hero, and I'm still playing with the balance a little bit on that, but I kind of like what I've done here. So what the short sword does is it basically allows you to re-roll 2 dice when attacking. I'm trying to avoid adding any kind of damage values to this game, because when you get into the magic item stack, you'll notice that most magic items do not have any kind of raw bonuses. Now, that's not true. There are some that give you just raw strength or raw defense, but it's very minimal. And if I were to add some very minimal defense or attack damage on these items, I think I would be making these things too powerful, and we want to make the magic items feel a lot more powerful than the mundane stuff. So this allows you to re-roll 2 dice with a short sword for each attack. And as I've been kind of thinking about this, I may actually lower that down even more. Maybe the short sword only 1 dice, and the dagger, as you see, is re-roll 1. I may lower that and just say that dagger doesn't do anything but can be thrown. So that's kind of work in progress. I'm still kind of tweaking that, but the game definitely needs some mundane equipment. And on the armor, I did something similar, except when you roll for damage, you get to roll a dice, and if you roll a 6 on the basic armor, you are able to avert damage. And on the heavier armor, you can roll a 5 or a 6, or plate mail a 4, 5, or 6. Now that has some movement penalties as well. I put on the chainmail and the plate mail. Now the neat thing I thought about the weapons is that when you're attacking, so like for example, let's say the battle axe, you get to reroll 4 dice when attacking. Now that you'd think, well, that's really powerful. If my wizard got a hold of that, they could really do some damage. The problem is that the wizard only has a maximum of 2 combat dice at all. So the wizard would never be able to use the battle axe efficiently anyway. Only a warrior would, who'd have enough dice to actually reroll. So I think that's a pretty cool idea. And just to kind of, some of the inspiration I'm getting for this comes from another great dungeon crawler called Blackstone Fortress, which is pretty new. But they've done something where the more damage you take, the less effective you are in combat. And this is kind of the same thing, because as you know, that when you lose enough wounds in Dungeon Saga, you get to a certain point. For example, here on the wizard, you get down to this point here, and you're going to roll 1 less die on combat. Now what that's going to do is that instead of me rolling 4 dice, I'm only rolling 3 dice now in combat. And if I've got a battle axe, suddenly my battle axe is less efficient, is less effective, because I'm only rolling 3 dice. So again, kind of ties in with Blackstone Fortress a little bit there. And there's a couple other things here I'm going to show you that